Hello, I'm Dr. Benjamin Miller. This video covers questions you might ask when considering fallacies as part of a rhetorical analysis. When asking whether a rhetorical fallacy has occurred, it's vital to contextualize the argument before drawing a conclusion about it. This is typical in studies of rhetoric, which begin with the idea that all communication is unique, taking place in particular situations. This idea is sometimes called the rhetorical situation, and you can read more about it in the recommended reading for this week by Crystal Swift. Swift uses the concept of the rhetorical situation to analyse a t-shirt and how the message was created and how it was received. You can read a more advanced study of the rhetorical situation in Jenny Edbauer's From Rhetorical Situation to Rhetorical Ecologies, an article that covers the critical history of the concept of the rhetorical situation and puts forward Edbauer's own theory of rhetorical ecologies. In relation to fallacies, the rhetorical situation is key. An article from 1981, published in Rhetoric Society Quarterly by Walter Minot, suggests that a fallacy in one situation is not a fallacy in another situation. And this is the core idea when asking whether something is a rhetorical fallacy. For example, in the John Oliver video where he presents an argument about student debt, you can ask whether he uses fallacies in a way that is unfair and manipulative. You might say, for example, that in the genre of a comedy rant, which John Oliver's argument clearly is part of, the audience expects exaggerated comparisons, which a professor in logic might call a false analogy. But because this exaggerated comparison is expected, it doesn't deceive the audience. In fact, it entertains the audience. So while it is a fallacy, it might not be called a rhetorical fallacy. So when you're watching John Oliver's argument, ask, do any of the fallacies in the video manipulate the audience? Are they unfair? For example, Oliver uses hasty generalizations, where you draw a broad conclusion based on an inadequate sample. When Oliver quotes from former college administrators, he concludes, yes, that's right, for-profit colleges are doing X based on those quotes. You might say that the sample he draws from is inadequate for the broad conclusion he draws. Therefore, it's a hasty generalization. The bigger question, though, is that fallacy unfair? Does it manipulate his audience? Recent research on rhetorical fallacies has looked at how fallacies can be effective in various situations. For example, Hoke and King in 2008 examined how advertising companies responded to complaints about food commercials they had produced. What they found out is that ad hominem, or unfair characterizations of a person, and straw man fallacies, or unfair characterizations of an argument, were often used in the commercial company's response to complaints. Hoke and King imply that the practice of using rhetorical fallacies to avoid accepting responsibility for those inappropriate commercials is very effective, and therefore the government should step in that industry to ensure more ethical commercials are produced. Another study by Beiser, Kozak and Hoteman examined the use of the straw man fallacy in different political arguments, and they found out two audiences are more likely to be persuaded by a straw man fallacy. The first audience is an audience that thinks the information is irrelevant or boring. So if someone's If you think someone will think you're being boring, then using a straw man fallacy will actually be very effective for them. The second audience was audiences who felt that a decision needed to be made quickly. These audiences were more likely to be persuaded by a straw man fallacy. So the key question here is not whether a fallacy is used, but whether that fallacy is a rhetorical fallacy. That is, in the particular situation in which it's used, is that fallacy unfair, unethical, or manipulative? When discussing rhetorical fallacies, you should define that fallacy, explain how a statement or a feature of an argument commits that fallacy, and then evaluate that in a rhetorical sense. Ask, has the author betrayed the audience? Does the audience expect this fallacy? Does the context of the argument make the fallacy unfair? Or is the fallacy harmful? You might well decide that the author has used a fallacy, but that it's not a rhetorical fallacy because it's expected by the audience. In conducting a rhetorical analysis that looks at how fallacies are used, you're going to become a better consumer of information. You'll start identifying when people are trying to manipulate you, and you'll also become a more ethical communicator because you'll be making decisions about the styles of reasoning you use that are appropriate for your audience.